There are sounds you never forget from a house like the Prestons. The polite clink of china. The steady hum of judgment. And Lydia Preston's heels, the morning alarm you couldn't snooze even if you prayed for mercy. The Preston house was too white, too polished, and too proud to ever be called a home. Every corner gleamed like it was terrified of dust. The curtains matched the furniture, and the air smelled like lavender and disapproval. I used to imagine the house had a soul once, maybe before Lydia's decorating stripped it clean. Lydia was my adopted mother. I called her mother because that was easier than explaining what she really was, an actress who never left the stage. Even her sighs sounded rehearsed. My father, Arthur Preston, was different. He had the kind of voice that made you feel safe just hearing it. He used to call me my second chance at joy. That's how he'd put it, smiling through the cough that had followed him like a stubborn pet since I was a child. And then there was Charlotte, his first daughter. Lydia's mirror in temperament, but with a better wardrobe and worse timing. Charlotte walked like the floor was lucky to have her. She said my name the way one might refer to the maid who'd overstayed her welcome. Mornings in our house were performances, mother directing, Charlotte starring, father coughing quietly in the background and me, somewhere off stage, refilling the teapot. That morning, the sunlight slanted across the dining room like a spotlight. Lydia sat at the head of the table, flipping through her phone with the seriousness of a surgeon. "Ella," she said without looking up, "you do remember toast is supposed to crisp, not mourn, don't you?" I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. She had a way with insults, elegant, precise, and completely unnecessary. Charlotte laughed from her seat, that high, effortless sound she saved for when she wanted attention. "Don't tease her, mother, she's trying, everyone needs a purpose." Her words hung in the air, sweet and rotten. I set the toast down quietly. "Would you like some jam, Charlotte?" "Only if it's imported," she said. "You know I have standards." "Don't we all?" I murmured almost too softly. But Lydia heard everything, she always did. "Sarcasm, Ella, it doesn't suit you. Leave that to people with confidence." I nodded and smiled, because that was safer than the truth. Arthur came in then, leaning slightly on the doorframe. His face had the pale warmth of someone who'd fought too long to stay gentle in a world that didn't deserve it. "Good morning, my girls," he said, smiling at all of us, but his eyes landed on me like sunlight finding a shadow. "Ella, you made breakfast again, you'll spoil us." "It's just toast, father," I said. "And kindness," he added, "which is rarer." Lydia rolled her eyes so gracefully, it almost looked ladylike. "Arthur, you're sentimental before coffee. It's endearing and exhausting." He laughed softly, and I watched him pour tea with shaking hands. I always wondered how love could survive in such a house. Then again, maybe his did because mine didn't. By noon, Lydia was dressed for her daily performance, floral suit, pearls, and that lethal perfume that made the air itself stand straighter. She was expecting Mrs. Hargrove for tea, her favourite gossip partner and her least favourite competition. From the kitchen, I could hear snippets of conversation drifting through the sitting room. "Of course, Charlotte's engagement has been such a blessing," Lydia said, her voice dripping with modesty and self-congratulation. "Ethan Blackwell comes from old money, you know, real money, not the new kind that sweats." Mrs. Hargrove gasped politely, and the younger one, Ella. "Ah yes, our little Charity. Arthur insisted on keeping her, sweet thing, though she does have a stubborn streak common among people with humble beginnings." I smiled at the teacups I was washing. Humble beginnings, that was Lydia's favourite euphemism for you don't belong here. She spoke as if I were an art project she regretted halfway through. That evening, Charlotte called me upstairs. I found her in front of her mirror, surrounded by dresses that could pay off a year's rent. She was trying them on one by one, posing, critiquing herself with the intensity of a sculptor who'd fallen in love with her own statue. "You like this one?" she asked, twirling. "Ethan says I look like a dream in red." "You do," I said honestly. "You sound surprised." "No, just impressed that a dress can survive your ego." She stopped, turned, and smiled that polished smile of hers, the one that could curdle milk. "Careful, Ella, sarcasm is unbecoming on people without options." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. She thrived on reaction. "You should come to the engagement party," she said, turning back to the mirror. "I mean, someone has to hand out the champagne, right?" You mean the staff? No, your family, but useful. She said it so naturally, like kindness was a language she'd never learned. That night when the laughter and glasses clinking had faded, Father knocked softly on my door. He always knocked twice, once as a courtesy, once as an apology for living with the rest of them. Can't sleep, he asked, stepping in. I keep thinking about the party, I said, and how they talk about me when they think I'm not listening. He sat beside me, the old chair creaking like it was on my side. You've done nothing wrong, Ella. Sometimes people mistake gentleness for weakness. Don't let them convince you it's the same thing. It's hard to be gentle when everyone wants to see you break. He smiled sadly. That's when it matters most. Outside, the rain began, soft, rhythmic, forgiving. I'd always loved the sound of rain in this house. It drowned out the noise that wasn't made by weather. When Father left, I stayed by the window, watching the raindrops trace slow, silver trails down the glass. Somewhere downstairs, Lydia and Charlotte were still talking about the engagement, their voices bright and brittle, like champagne that had lost its fizz. And for the first time, I realized something quietly terrifying. They didn't hate me because I was different. They hated me because I stayed kind when they couldn't. The next morning, Lydia began planning Charlotte's perfect wedding, the guest list, the flowers, the headlines. She had no idea she was also planning her own undoing. Because cruelty is a funny thing. It always forgets who's been watching. They thought I was too gentle to fight back. But gentleness isn't weakness, it's patience sharpening its edge. Tell me, have you ever been the quiet one they underestimated? Type "I see you, Ella" in the comments if you've ever been treated like you didn't belong, and still found a way to rise. And don't forget to subscribe, because this is only the calm before my storm. There are silences that hum louder than words, and that morning at the Preston breakfast table, the silence had a pulse. Lydia was stirring her tea like she was erasing something from memory. Charlotte sat opposite, her spoon clinking against her cup with delicate menace, eyes glinting with a secret she was dying to share. Father's newspaper trembled slightly as he held it, not from curiosity, but from exhaustion. I had learned that every tremor in his hands said more than Lydia's speeches ever did. I was refilling his cup when Lydia cleared her throat. That sound had power in the house, the kind that made servants freeze mid-step. Arthur, she began, using the same tone she used to announce donations at charity galas. I've been thinking about Ella's future. The sentence landed on the table like a drop of acid. I didn't look up. I had learned that in this house, curiosity was an invitation to pain. Father lowered the paper slightly. Her future. Yes, Lydia said with an approving nod, as though she were confirming the weather. She's at that age where young women ought to be settled. Charlotte's engagement to Ethan is such a blessing, it would be lovely to see Ella secure something similar. Charlotte smirked, eyes bright. Oh, absolutely, it wouldn't be fair for me to have all the attention, would it? Attention is like perfume, dear, I said without thinking, best used sparingly. Lydia's head snapped up, smile tightening like a ribbon drawn too hard. Sarcasm doesn't flatter you, Ella, it's best left to people who can afford consequences. I'll remember that, I said. Father coughed quietly into his napkin, a small rebellion, his way of puncturing Lydia's theatrics. Unbothered, she continued, there's a respectable young man in the countryside, Daniel Hawthorne. His family owns farmland near Belwick, humble roots, solid values. I think he'd be a suitable match for Ella. Suitable, the word she used for dresses she didn't like but couldn't return. Charlotte leaned forward, all sugar and venom. Oh, Mother, how perfect. Ella always did have that country look, you know, the kind of face that matches wildflowers and wooden fences. Father folded his paper, sighing. Lydia, perhaps Ella should decide for herself. Lydia looked genuinely amused. Arthur, she's a sweet girl but hardly practical. We must guide her before she makes impulsive choices. Like marrying a fortune hunter, Father muttered. The temperature in the room dropped a degree. Lydia's smile froze midair, Charlotte's hand stilled on her teacup. I almost smiled, almost. Then Lydia exhaled, slow and deliberate like a woman recalibrating her performance. Let's not drag up the past, we're talking about Ella's future now. The Hawthorns are visiting this weekend, it's settled. And that was that. Lydia loved nothing more than closing a conversation she had just opened. Saturday came dressed in grey clouds and the smell of rain-soaked roses. The Preston estate gleamed, polished floors, polished manners and polished lies. Lydia had spent the morning directing maids, fluffing pillows, and giving me a speech about humility disguised as fashion advice. "Nothing too bright," she said, inspecting me like a critic before a debut. "Men like Daniel appreciate modesty. Remember, dear, simplicity is your only luxury." I chose a soft cream dress, simple but well-fitted, and twisted my hair up loosely. Lydia frowned at the result, which told me it was perfect. When Daniel Hawthorne arrived, the rain stopped, as if out of politeness. His carriage wasn't grand but well-kept, the kind that spoke of quiet wealth and older values. He stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair slightly damp from the drizzle. His clothes were plain but too well-tailored to belong to a man struggling. He carried himself differently, not with the stiff pride of city men like Ethan Blackwell, but with the grounded ease of someone who didn't need to impress. "Mr. Hawthorne," Lydia greeted, voice sugared and insincere. "Welcome to our home. I hope the journey wasn't dreadful." "It was peaceful, ma'am," he replied, nodding slightly. His voice had that quiet depth that made even simple words sound steady. When his gaze met mine, I expected the usual curiosity, pity, maybe indifference. But he looked at me with something else entirely. Recognition. Like he'd seen people like me before, the ones who stood in the background and noticed everything. "Miss Ella," he said politely, "it's a pleasure." "Likewise," I replied, trying not to sound surprised. Behind us, Charlotte whispered to her mother, "Pleasure now, poverty later." I pretended not to hear. I suspected Daniel did. His jaw tensed ever so slightly, but he said nothing. Tea with the Hawthorns was a sport Lydia played to win. She dominated the conversation with polished laughter, dropping Charlotte's name into every sentence like a calling card. "Of course, Charlotte's fiancé is Ethan Blackwell, the Blackwells of Hollingsworth. Old money," she said, emphasizing the phrase the way one might announce royalty. "And Ella, well, she's always been our quiet one. Modest, kind, perfect for country life." Translation: she won't embarrass us by being ambitious. Daniel smiled faintly, glancing at me. The countryside is peaceful, but it takes strength to live simply. Lydia's smile faltered. "Oh, I'm sure Ella will adjust, she's adaptable." Father coughed again, this time into his tea. When Lydia left to fetch more pastries, code for checking her reflection, Daniel leaned slightly closer. "You don't seem like someone who adjusts easily," he said softly. I tilted my head. "That depends on what I'm adjusting to." A flicker of a smile, brief, genuine. "Then perhaps we'll get along." Charlotte returned just in time to ruin the moment. "I do hope you like peace and quiet, Mr. Hawthorne. Ella has enough of both to share." "Quiet can be a strength," he said, meeting her gaze calmly. "Some people mistake noise for presence." Charlotte blinked, caught off guard. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. For the first time in years, I felt like someone else in that house saw what I saw, and wasn't afraid to say it. That night, Lydia entered my room without knocking, the same way guilt enters a conscience. She stood by the doorway, back straight, arms crossed. "Ella," she said softly, "you will be gracious about this arrangement. The Hawthorns are respectable, you'll be provided for, and more importantly, it will give Charlotte space to build her life without distraction." I folded my hands in my lap, meaning me. Her lips curved, pleased that I understood. "Exactly. It's time you thought about your father, dear. You know how stress affects his heart, if he saw you resist this match." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The implication hung in the air, my father's health as bargaining chip. I nodded once. "I understand." "You always do," she said, leaving as softly as she came. When the door clicked shut, the quiet expanded around me until it felt like a living thing. I sat by the window, moonlight washing over the floorboards, and whispered, "All right. Let's play your game, Lydia." The next morning the house felt brighter, cruelly so. Lydia hummed as she wrote letters, invitations, arrangements, plans. Charlotte pranced about rehearsing how she'd look at her wedding. Father barely touched his tea. He watched me with sad, knowing eyes but said nothing. I understood that silence was his way of apologizing for what he couldn't stop. I smiled because smiling cost them nothing but peace. As I buttered my toast, a strange calm settled in my chest, the kind that comes before a storm you've stopped running from. Maybe this wasn't exile at all. Maybe it was an invitation. They thought sending me away would end the story. But some stories grow sharper when you bury them. Tell me, have you ever been pushed out just so someone else could shine? Type "still standing" in the comments if you've ever turned exile into evolution. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the girl they send away is the one who comes back to rule. When the carriage finally pulled away from the Preston estate, I didn't cry. I thought I might, out of habit, or nostalgia, or maybe grief for the version of myself that kept waiting for kindness from people who had none to give. But the truth was, I felt lighter. The city blurred behind me, all sharp angles, gossip and glass. Ahead stretched a long, endless road that seemed to hum with possibilities. For once, no one was watching, and for someone like me, that was its own kind of freedom. Charlotte, of course, made sure to turn my departure into theatre. She arrived at dawn, wrapped in silk and superiority, her parasol angled perfectly against the morning sun. "Well," she said, looking me up and down like a tailor assessing a flawed garment, "you do make an effort. I almost didn't recognize you." "Good," I said, folding my hands in my lap. I was aiming for unrecognizable. Her smile thinned, that rehearsed perfect curve that always came before cruelty. "You're lucky, you know," she went on, circling the carriage like a cat. "Daniel Hawthorne is simple. You won't have to worry about the things that overwhelm you here, like ambition or relevance." I tilted my head. "That must be a relief then, you've never been good with competition." Her eyes flashed, but she didn't answer. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Mother says not to write, it'll only make things harder for father." I smiled, polite, distant, final. "Then I won't." Charlotte blinked, thrown off by my calm. She expected tears, maybe pleading. Instead, I just closed the carriage door. As the wheels began to turn, she called after me, "Enjoy the mud, Ella." I leaned out the window long enough to say, "And you enjoy the mirrors." The countryside unfolded like a painting that kept forgetting it was supposed to be still. Fields rolled and shimmered in sunlight, the trees leaned together, whispering like old friends. The air smelled of pine and something sweeter, freedom maybe. I found myself breathing deeper. No lavender perfume, no polished marble floors waiting to echo someone's disapproval. Just sky and silence. Halfway through the journey, the driver glanced at me through the mirror. "First time leaving the city, miss." "First time leaving without being followed," I said. He chuckled. "You'll like Belwick then. It's quiet here, but not the kind of quiet that feels empty." I looked out the window again. Good, I've had enough of empty noise. When the carriage finally stopped, I expected the kind of countryside house Lydia would call quaint. Something small, maybe slightly crooked, with chickens greeting the morning. Instead, I stepped out into a long gravel driveway lined with chestnut trees, their branches stretched wide, filtering gold light onto the path. At the end stood a manor, not ostentatious, not cold, but deeply rooted. Its walls were ivy-wrapped, the windows glinting like old secrets. It looked alive. The kind of place that had seen storms and survived them quietly. And there by the door stood Daniel Hawthorne. He wasn't what I expected either. He wasn't old or unkempt or weathered, as Lydia had described him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, hair slightly mussed like he'd just walked in from tamming the wind itself. He smiled, a small, grounded smile. "Mrs. Hawthorne." "Ella," I corrected gently. "Mrs. Hawthorne makes me sound finished." He chuckled, offering his hand. "Ella, then welcome home." "Holmes," I echoed, caught off guard. "Well," he said, eyes warm, "it's yours now too, isn't it?" And just like that, my heart stuttered once sharply. The house smelled faintly of lemon and wood smoke, a scent that felt honest. Every surface was worn but cared for. Polished tables, thick curtains, books stacked in corners like old friends left mid-conversation. It wasn't the sterile perfection of Lydia's house. It was lived in, loved even. This is, I hesitated, searching for the right word, peaceful. Daniel looked amused. "Not what you were expecting." "I was told to bring my own bucket," I said. He laughed, a low, genuine sound. "You can if you miss the city's chores." "Only if it comes with sarcasm. I've grown attached." He tilted his head, watching me. "I can tell." It wasn't flirtation exactly, it was awareness. The kind that makes you feel seen properly for the first time in years. We were interrupted by the sound of footsteps, quick, purposeful, and accompanied by the faint smell of cinnamon. A plump woman in her 50s bustled in, wiping her hands on her apron. "Master Daniel, you didn't tell me she was arriving today. Oh, look at her, she's lovely." She turned to me, eyes kind and appraising all at once. "You must be Ella, we've been expecting you. I've prepared the blue room, it's got the best light in the morning." "Thank you," I said, startled by her warmth. "You're very kind." "Kindness costs less than gossip," she said with a wink. "You'll get used to us here, we like quiet people, they listen before they talk." I smiled because for once, I wasn't the only one who thought that was a good thing. That evening, Daniel and I sat across from each other at a wooden table that could fit 10, but only held 2. The food was simple: bread, roast vegetables, stew, but everything tasted richer, more deliberate, as if made by someone who wanted you to be nourished, not impressed. "Does it bother you?" he asked after a while. "What?" "Leaving your family, the city, all that noise." I smiled faintly. "Bother me, number Lydia will assume it does though, which means I'm winning." That made him laugh quietly, but with his whole face. "You're not what I expected either," he admitted. "Oh, what did you expect?" He shrugged. "Someone quiet, obedient, the kind who apologizes for breathing." "Ah," I said, breaking a piece of bread, "so you believed their reviews." "I prefer forming my own opinions," he replied. "Then you'll be disappointed," I said lightly. "I'm dreadfully unpredictable." "Good," he said simply, "I like surprises." And somehow that made the room warmer. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me. Belwick Manor was the kind of house that invited exploration, every door slightly ajar, every hallway humming softly with history. That's how I found the study. Books lined the shelves, ledgers neatly arranged, maps and letters spread on the desk. I recognized one of the seals immediately, the hawthorn crest, pressed in real gold. I leaned closer, reading. Belwick Trading Company. Daniel Hawthorne, Managing Director. I froze. The name rang familiar. Even Lydia had mentioned Belwick once, with that reverent tone reserved for families with real money. So this was the poor country man she'd tossed me toward. Lydia Preston, self-proclaimed connoisseur of status, had unknowingly handed me over to wealth that didn't need to perform. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Quietly at first, then louder, the sound swallowed by the crackling fire. When Daniel found me moments later, I was still at his desk, half guilty and half delighted. "You found the study," he said. "It found me," I said. "I was drawn to the smell of secrets." He smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "And what did the secret say?" "That you're not what you pretend to be." "I don't pretend," he said, walking closer. "I just don't advertise." "Does my family know?" He shook his head. "Your mother wanted simple, I gave her simple." "Why?" His eyes softened. "Because I wanted to see if you'd still choose to stay." Something inside me stilled. "I didn't choose," I said after a long pause. "They pushed." "Maybe," he said, voice low, "but you're still here." And I realized he was right. I wasn't running anymore. I was standing still, and for the first time it didn't feel like surrender. I lay awake for a long time, the rain whispering against the window. The bed was soft, the air smelled of pine and warmth, and the silence felt like an embrace. For years I'd been told I was lucky to be taken in, as if kindness was something borrowed. But here, surrounded by quiet and honesty, I began to wonder. Maybe I hadn't been taken in, maybe I'd finally arrived. They sent me here to disappear. Instead, I'd found a man who didn't need me to perform, a home that didn't demand perfection, and the faint, dangerous spark of belonging. And deep down, I knew Lydia would hate that more than anything. They wanted me buried under simplicity, but even wildflowers bloom in dirt. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated, only to bloom right where they left you? Type wildflower in the comments if you know what it means to rise quietly. And don't forget to subscribe, the peace won't last long. Lydia's storm is already on the horizon. Mornings at Belwick Manor began with sunlight that didn't need permission to enter. It poured through the windows, landed on the floorboards, and warmed the house from the inside out, a kindness the Preston home never learned. Mrs. Green always started the day before dawn, clattering pans and humming hymns off-key. The first few times I woke to her voice, I nearly jumped out of bed. In the Preston house, noise meant someone was displeased. Here it meant breakfast. Daniel had a habit of drinking his tea with one hand and reading his ledgers with the other. He did it with the concentration of a man performing surgery on numbers. "You work even during breakfast?" I asked one morning, buttering toast that actually crisped. He looked up, faintly guilty. "I like to start early. And finish late. Usually." I slid his cup a little out of reach. "Then you'll die young and I'll have to explain to Mrs. Green why her favourite employer starved himself to death." He blinked at me, then laughed, a real startled laugh that lit his whole face. "Are you always this direct?" "Only when I like someone." He looked almost boyish then. "So I'm in danger." "Constantly," I said, passing him the jam. The days stretched slow and golden. I spent mornings exploring the gardens, wild roses, overgrown ivy, lavender that hummed with bees. The countryside didn't judge me for walking barefoot or talking to plants. It just listened. Afternoons, I joined Mrs. Green in the kitchen. She tried to teach me to bake bread. "Fold it like this," she said, demonstrating with the confidence of a queen. I tried, the dough stuck to my fingers like guilt. She said, peering at my attempt. "Yours looks enthusiastic." "Enthusiastic," I laughed. "Yes, like it's trying to escape." We both burst out laughing, and I realized that was the first time in years I'd laughed without watching my tone. It came on the 7th day. Thick cream paper, the Preston crest in red wax, Lydia's handwriting sharp enough to cut skin. Daniel handed it to me at breakfast. "From your family." "From my relatives," I corrected. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I didn't open it immediately. I left it on the table untouched while I finished my tea. The silence between us thickened like honey. Finally I said, "She never writes unless it benefits her." "Then you already know what it says," Daniel replied. He was right, but curiosity is a stubborn disease. The letter began predictably. "My dearest Ella, how strange that your name should still be ours by law. Your father's health has taken another turn. Charlotte's wedding plans have been delayed, the Blackwells are reconsidering certain financial matters. Perhaps your husband might help us smooth things over. After all, it's the least you can do for family." I folded the letter neatly, set it beside my plate and smiled. "Ah, there it is." Daniel looked up. "There what is?" "The sound of hypocrisy, printed in ink." That night we sat by the fireplace, the rain tapping softly on the windows. Daniel studied me for a long moment. "You're not going to reply?" he asked. "I might," I said, "but not in writing. Some messages deserve to travel slowly, preferably by karma." He smiled, turning the page of his book. "You surprise me daily, Mrs. Hawthorne." "I told you," I said, "predictability is boring." He looked at me then, really looked, and I felt it, that shift. The quiet awareness that happens when two people start to understand each other's silences. A thunderstorm rolled in after midnight. I woke to the sound of rain lashing against the roof and footsteps in the corridor. Daniel stood at the window, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair tousled. "Can't sleep?" I asked softly. "Storm too loud," he said without turning. "Or your thoughts are?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe both." I walked over, stood beside him. The lightning flashed, illuminating his profile, calm, steady. "Grounded." "I used to think storms were punishment," I said. "Now they just sound like truth being spoken loudly." He looked at me, eyes warm. "You're full of strange wisdom." Strange is the only kind that lasts. We stayed there, not speaking, while the thunder rumbled like distant applause. By morning another letter arrived, this time from Mrs. Hargrove, written in scandalized cursive. Apparently the Blackwells had pulled out of Charlotte's engagement. Something about financial misrepresentations. Translation: Ethan wasn't rich, just loud. I laughed so hard Mrs. Green nearly dropped the teapot. Daniel looked up from his newspaper. "Good news." "Oh, the best," I said, "poetic justice freshly delivered." He raised an eyebrow. "Do I want to know?" "Probably not, but I'll enjoy watching them realize what they lost." For years, I measured my worth by their approval. Now I measured it by laughter, the quiet kind that bubbles up from peace. Belwick Manor had given me something the Prestons never could, the room to breathe, to think, to become. But a small part of me knew peace couldn't last. Lydia Preston didn't let go of her stage that easily. Peace is a trickster, it always comes just before the plot twist. Tell me, have you ever found calm, only to feel a storm creeping in behind it? Type the calm before in the comments if you can feel it too. And don't forget to subscribe, because Lydia's curtain call is coming, and I'll be ready. The thing about fragile people is, they don't break. They shatter. And when they do, the noise is magnificent. The first echo of that noise came wrapped in lace and gossip. Mrs. Green was the one who brought it to me, breathless from her weekly market trip. You'll never guess who was spotted at the Ritz, without a fiancé. I raised an eyebrow. Charlotte. Mrs. Green nodded, eyes wide. Apparently the Blackwells have withdrawn their engagement. Word is the young master's family discovered discrepancies. Discrepancies, I echoed, stirring my tea slowly. Such a polite word for lies. She leaned closer. And your mother, pardon, Mrs. Preston, was seen at the jeweller, trying to sell some of her diamond pieces. Quietly, of course. I smiled into my cup. Of course, pride must always travel first class even when it's bankrupt. The papers picked it up 2 days later. Society wedding cancelled amidst financial confusion. I almost applauded. There was something oddly satisfying about reading the downfall of people who used to read me like I was an inconvenience. Daniel noticed my mood that morning as I hummed while tending to the roses. You seem pleased, he said carefully, wiping his hands on a cloth. Oh, just the universe finally balancing its books, I replied, clipping a rose with unnecessary precision. He chuckled. Should I be afraid? Only if you've ever lied to a banker or a girl in pearls. I've done neither, he said. Then you're safe for now. 3 weeks later, the carriage arrived. Black, polished, self-important. I was in the garden again when I saw it turn up the drive, trailed by dust and misplaced dignity. Charlotte stepped out first, her hat wider than her morals. Lydia followed, face painted in desperation disguised as poise. Ella, she said in that tone that used to make me shrink, you look well. I've been told peace has that effect, I said, dusting off my gloves. Charlotte fidgeted, adjusting her lace sleeves. We need to speak privately. I looked at Daniel, who stood on the porch with his usual calm authority. Anything you have to say can be said here. Charlotte's jaw tightened. Lydia's voice softened to syrup. Ella, darling, your father's health has worsened again. We've been under terrible stress since, well, everything. We thought perhaps your husband could. Lend money, I interrupted, smiling politely. Her eyes flickered. Support family. Ah, there it was, the magic word they only remembered when the bills came due. Daniel stepped forward, his presence quiet but sharp. Mrs. Hawthorne doesn't discuss business with visitors, especially uninvited ones. Charlotte's eyes widened. You're speaking for her. She has better things to do, he said, and turned away. I swear it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me. After they left, I found myself sitting by the window, watching their carriage disappear down the lane. There was no satisfaction, just peace. A clean kind of peace that comes when you finally stop caring whether villains apologize. That night, Daniel joined me by the fire. Was it difficult seeing them, he asked. Once it would have been, I said. Now it just feels like watching a play I've already seen, same script, fewer emotions. He nodded thoughtfully. You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for. I smiled faintly. They mistook silence for submission, but silence, Daniel, is just strategy resting. He laughed softly. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Oh, you couldn't afford it, I teased. Not even with your secret fortune. Sometimes revenge doesn't need fireworks. Sometimes it just needs witnesses. And today, the world had witnessed exactly what happens when you build your status on borrowed illusions. But I wasn't done yet. Not because I wanted vengeance, because I wanted closure. There's a difference between burning bridges and lighting your own way. And I was just getting started. It's strange how quickly silence replaces applause when the music stops. Once upon a time, Lydia Preston couldn't walk into a room without conversation pausing in reverence. Now it paused in pity. The invitations stopped coming first. Then the smiles, polite, strained, and brief. By the end of spring, even Mrs. Hargrove crossed the street to avoid her. Society is very devout when it comes to worshipping stability, and Lydia had lost hers. Rumour travels faster than guilt, and in the Preston family's case there was plenty of both. Word had it that the Blackwells had discovered financial misrepresentation. I called it what it was, fraud, with a decorative ribbon. I read about it in the Gazette one morning, while Daniel repaired a gate that didn't actually need fixing. He glanced up when I laughed. "What's funny?" he asked. "Oh, just an article on moral bankruptcy," I said. "They're calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding." He smirked. "That's society's word for karma. Karma's more punctual." I took another sip of tea and continued reading, savouring each sentence the way Lydia used to savour compliments. Apparently, she was throwing intimate dinners to remind people she still existed. A desperate performance, one last attempt to curtsy her way back into a world that now found her tedious. Charlotte, meanwhile, had reinvented herself, or tried to. She'd dyed her hair darker, scandal, declared she was focusing on self-growth, and started posting poetic quotes on social pages about resilience. Every caption was a cry for attention wearing lipstick. She even wrote to me once, a delicate, guilt-tinged letter about how we used to be sisters. I almost admired her creativity. We were never sisters, we were cohabitants of mutual endurance. I tucked the letter away in a drawer, not out of sentimentality, out of curiosity. It's fascinating, the things guilty people think might absolve them. Life with Daniel had settled into a rhythm that felt suspiciously like happiness. He worked, I wrote, we laughed often. Sometimes he'd catch me staring out at the horizon, lost in thought. "Are you still thinking about them?" he asked one evening as we sat by the fire. "I'm thinking about gravity," I said. "How everything that rises eventually falls, they just fell faster than expected." He chuckled. "You sound almost disappointed." "Not disappointed, intrigued. There's something to be learned from people who mistake noise for importance." He nodded. "You mean Lydia?" "I mean all of them," I paused, "but Lydia most of all. Because if there's one thing Lydia Preston hated more than being poor, it was being pitied. And the city had started doing both. It began with whispers, servants talking, acquaintances whispering, creditors visiting discreetly. Then came the carriages, fewer each week, until the Preston home, once the stage for so many grand performances, began to echo with emptiness. Even the curtains looked tired. One afternoon, a letter arrived in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. The seal was cracked, the edges smudged. Desperation doesn't handle ink well. "Ella, your father's condition worsens daily. He asks for you often. Please come home, we have much to discuss." Lydia. I read it 3 times slowly. She'd written home, that was the funniest part. The Preston house had never been a home, it had been a museum of appearances. Daniel watched my expression carefully. "Are you going?" "I'll visit father," I said, "but Lydia doesn't want me there for love, she wants me there for leverage." He tilted his head. "You're sure?" "I've learned to read between Lydia's lines. There's always a transaction hiding behind her affection." He smiled softly. "Then go, but promise me something." "What's that?" "Don't bring back their ghosts, let them haunt themselves." When I stepped into the Preston house again, it was like walking through the ruins of a lie. The chandeliers still hung, but their brilliance was dimmed. The walls smelled faintly of perfume and regret. Charlotte appeared at the top of the stairs, thinner, paler, still stunning in that hollow way rich girls sometimes are when their beauty becomes their only currency. "Ella," she breathed like my name tasted strange. "Charlotte, you came for father." Her lips twitched. "Of course." Lydia descended the staircase moments later, pearls still around her neck, though I suspected they were now imitation. She opened her arms like a benevolent queen. "Ella, darlings, I stepped back before she could touch me. How, father? Her smile faltered for the briefest second. Resting, he'll be thrilled to see you. As she led me to his room, I caught my reflection in one of her grand mirrors. Funny, the house looked smaller now. Or maybe I'd simply outgrown it. Father was frail, yes, but alive, and when he saw me, he smiled the same way he always had, like I'd brought spring with me. My Ella, he whispered, you look happy. I am, I said, squeezing his hand gently. He nodded weakly. Good, I always knew you'd find peace before they found humility. His eyes glimmered with mischief. Even now he still had that spark, that quiet rebellion Lydia never managed to snuff out. I told him about Daniel, about the garden, about the life we'd built. He listened like every word was worth saving. When he drifted to sleep, Lydia appeared again, her mask slipping just enough to reveal what lay beneath fear. Ella, she said softly, you have no idea how hard things have been. We're struggling, your father's care, the estate. I looked at her evenly. You mean the creditors? She stiffened. That's not. Oh, don't worry, I said with a smile that wasn't one. I'm sure we'll find a way to settle debts, one way or another. Her eyes narrowed. She recognized the tone, the same one she'd used on me all my life. Only this time it wasn't hers anymore. And that was the first day Lydia Preston began to realize what I already knew. You can lose everything slowly and still not notice until it's gone. They used to call me fragile. Turns out I was just quietly evolving. Have you ever walked back into a place that once broke you, only to realize it can't touch you anymore? Type unbothered in the comments if you've ever outgrown a version of yourself someone else built. And don't forget to subscribe, because Lydia's about to learn the difference between grace and survival. There's a peculiar art to desperation. It dresses up nicely, smiles too widely, and insists everything is simply wonderful. 2 weeks after my visit, Lydia Preston's latest performance arrived in the form of an invitation. Cream envelope, gold trim, the kind of paper that screamed money even as the ink trembled from debt. Mrs. Lydia Preston requests the pleasure of your company at the annual Society Gala, in support of the Children's Literacy Fund. Children's literacy. A noble cause. And deeply ironic, considering Lydia had never read a single emotional cue correctly in her life. Daniel turned the envelope in his hand, so she's still hosting galas. She's allergic to humility, I said, buttering my toast. Even bankruptcy can't cure that. He chuckled. And she invited you. Of course, Lydia's the kind of woman who invites her enemies just to make sure they're watching. Are we going? Absolutely, I said, sipping my tea. If Lydia insists on burning in public, the least I can do is bring marshmallows. The Preston ballroom was unchanged, all gilt and glory, the chandeliers trembling under the weight of borrowed pride. The air smelled of roses, desperation, and unpaid invoices. Every detail screamed, look how fine we are, which is society's polite way of saying look how terrified we've become. Daniel and I arrived fashionably late. I'd chosen a navy velvet gown, understated, regal, confident. The colour of quiet authority. Lydia stood near the grand staircase, dazzling in silver satin that reflected light but not truth. Charlotte hovered beside her, a carefully curated accessory in pastel blue. Their smiles froze when they saw me. For the first time in years I felt taller, not in height, in presence. Lydia's expression flickered between panic and performance. Ella, darling, how wonderful of you to come. Wouldn't miss it, I said, handing my coat to the attendant. You know I'm passionate about reading, especially between the lines. Her smile twitched. How charming. Isn't it? The guest list was a parade of polite opportunists, people who once flocked to Lydia for favours and now came to see the spectacle. I recognised most of them. Mrs. Hargrove with her judgmental pearls, Lord Marbury pretending his lineage compensated for his bankruptcy, and half the city's gossip columnists disguised as donors. They fluttered around Lydia like moths, unsure whether the light was safe or electric. She's trying too hard, Mrs. Hargrove whispered behind her fan. She always did, I murmured back. Only difference now is the lighting's better. Dinner was a symphony of silverware and subtle cruelty. The table glittered with crystal glasses, laughter that didn't reach eyes and compliments with teeth. Lydia sat at the head, every inch the hostess. She complimented everyone except the one person she feared most, me. Charlotte, meanwhile, giggled strategically, ensuring her every laugh landed near a potential heir. At one point, a lady across from me asked, "Mrs. Hawthorne, is it true you've moved to the countryside?" "Yes," I said cheerfully. "I wanted a quieter life, fewer liars per acre." The table went silent for a second before breaking into polite chuckles. Lydia's knuckles whitened around her wineglass. Halfway through dessert, Lydia stood up, her gown shimmering under the chandeliers. "To new beginnings," she began, voice slightly too bright. "To forgiveness, family and fortitude, may we all find grace in difficult times." Ah, grace. Her favorite word when she wanted to borrow money. When she sat down, everyone clapped politely, the way people clap when they've witnessed effort, not talent. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, smiling. "To lessons," I said, lifting my glass. "To those who learn them early and those who require repetition. To remembering that kindness is not weakness, and that reputation, like champagne, should never be built on bubbles." A hush, then laughter, soft, knowing, dangerous. Daniel added quietly, "To truth, it tends to age better than pretense." Applause followed, the kind that sounds gentle but draws blood. Lydia smiled, but her eyes were glass, cracked, fragile, one tremor away from shattering. Later, as music filled the room, Charlotte approached Daniel near the balcony. Her perfume arrived before she did, expensive, heavy, suffocating. "Oh, Mr. Hawthorne," she said, placing a hand on his arm. "I was just saying how lovely you look tonight." He glanced at her hand, then at her face. "You were." "Yes," she purred. "Ella's lucky, you've done well for yourself." "Thank you," he said politely. "I mean," she added with a sly smile, "I always thought you two were mismatched. You're so refined, she's so." "Listening," I said, appearing beside her with perfect timing. Charlotte froze. I smiled sweetly. "You were saying." She laughed awkwardly. "Oh, Ella, I was just complimenting your husband." "Were you?" I tilted my head. "How generous. Compliments are rare from people who specialize in comparisons." Her cheeks flushed. Daniel, ever composed, offered her a napkin. "You've spilled your drink." "It's champagne," she snapped. "Still sticky," he said, tone mild but cutting. She spun on her heel and walked straight into a waiter. The collision sent a wave of champagne splashing down her gown. The entire room turned. For one exquisite moment, time froze. Then came the laughter. Not cruel, honest. Charlotte's mortification glowed brighter than the chandeliers. And somewhere in the corner, a photographer's flash sealed her humiliation forever. The sound of laughter hit Lydia like a gunshot. Her composure faltered. Her face, that mask of practiced serenity, cracked visibly. She rushed to Charlotte's side, murmuring frantic reassurances that fooled no one. I watched her bend, the queen reduced to servant, clutching at the frayed edges of dignity. And I thought, this is how power ends, not with scandal or revenge, with exposure. Lydia caught my eye briefly. For the first time, she didn't look furious, she looked afraid. Daniel and I slipped out before the music resumed. Outside, the night air was cool, clean, the kind of air that doesn't lie. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he asked, offering his arm. "Immensely," I said. "There's something poetic about watching people drown in the same shallowness they worshipped." He smiled. "You're dangerous when poetic." "Dangerous," I said, laughing softly. "No, just awake." We walked toward the carriage, the ballroom's laughter fading behind us. I didn't feel triumphant. Just free. Because some revenge isn't loud. It's graceful. It's walking away from the fire, knowing you didn't need to light it for it to burn. They spent years pretending to be untouchable. But when the curtain fell, all I saw were actors bowing to emptiness. Have you ever watched someone's arrogance crumble beautifully? Type "curtain down" in the comments if you've ever seen pride perform its own downfall. And don't forget to subscribe, because Lydia hasn't learned her final lesson yet. Headlines, darling. That's where the real funerals happen in high society. The Preston Gala, when champagne meets consequences. A pearl falls from Grace, can Lydia polish her reputation back? From gossip to Grace, the Preston family's next act. I read them over breakfast, dunking toast in tea the way one baptizes regrets. Lydia would have fainted if she'd seen the photo they chose, her smile stretched too wide, Charlotte mid-blink beside her. In the old days, she would have rung every editor within a 50-mile radius. Now she rang florists instead. Because when pride dies it doesn't vanish, it redecorates. 2 weeks after the gala, an embossed envelope slid under my door. The Hearts of Grace Foundation Charity Gala. Restoring hope, rebuilding reputation, one donation at a time. Lydia's handwriting at the bottom, looped and desperate. She'd created a foundation, named after the one thing she'd never owned, Grace. And she'd sent me an invitation, as if extending mercy. "You'll attend, won't you, Ella?" she said later at breakfast, smiling like a dentist. "It's for the community." "Which one?" I asked. "The one you live in or the one you photograph?" She ignored that, of course. Selective hearing runs in her bloodline. To the audience, quietly. "You know the type, people who donate guilt in glossy envelopes and call it charity." The ballroom of the Marigold Hotel glittered like an apology. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables wrapped in ivory linen. Every woman shimmered. Every man adjusted a cufflink that probably cost a semester of tuition. Lydia stood near the stage, sequined and smiling, Charlotte beside her in pastel repentance. Cameras flashed. Lydia had rehearsed her redemption arc to perfection. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice syrup-sweet, "tonight we gather not just to give but to forgive." Applause scattered politely, like people clapping for weather. I lingered by the edge of the crowd, glass of champagne in hand, watching the theatre unfold. Then he arrived. Daniel walked in wearing quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need designer labels to be noticed. The room shifted around him, subtly, instinctively, as if gravity remembered its duties. Lydia spotted him and nearly tripped over her speech cards. "Mr. Hayes," she exclaimed, waving him forward, "you came." Of course he had. His company had anonymously sponsored part of the event, Lydia's trap disguised as gratitude. He nodded politely, "Wouldn't miss it, Mrs. Preston." The cameras loved it, her hand on his arm, his patience stretched thin, the audience hungry. Then came the line that ended her social career. "Everyone," Lydia announced, "please raise a glass to our most generous supporter, Mr. Hayes, without whom tonight would not be possible." The spotlight hit him. He looked at her, then at the crowd, then, just briefly, at me. Calm, certain. "I appreciate the recognition," he said, his tone even, "but there's been a misunderstanding. My contribution tonight was made in the name of Ella Preston, the woman who actually believes in grace." Silence. A perfect pearled silence that burst like glass a heartbeat later. A ripple of whispers spread, and every eye turned to me. Lydia's smile froze mid-glow, Charlotte's clutch hit the floor. Lydia tried to laugh. "Oh, Daniel, you're teasing." "No," he said gently, "I don't tease about integrity." Someone coughed, someone else recorded. Lydia's face went from porcelain to paper. She reached for charm, found none. The orchestra, unsure whether to keep playing, faltered into a pitiful waltz. Charlotte attempted rescue. Mother's intentions were misinterpreted. "Consistent with her track record," murmured someone near the punch table. Laughter, a dangerous, elegant kind, spilled through the hall. And that was it. All the years she'd spent curating perfection, undone by one honest sentence and a room full of witnesses. I didn't gloat, I simply watched, sipping my champagne like medicine. When Daniel's gaze found mine again, he smiled, small, deliberate, the sort of smile that says we're done hiding. Lydia stumbled off stage, her heels echoing like accusations. Charlotte followed, a pastel ghost trailing disappointment. To the audience, softly. "You could feel it, couldn't you? That moment when the predator realizes the audience has changed sides." As the crowd resumed its polite chatter, I slipped outside to the hotel balcony. The night air was cool, forgiving. From inside came the muffled sound of clinking glasses and dying pride. Funny thing about grace, it doesn't bloom under chandeliers. It grows quietly, in the hearts that survive humiliation without inflicting it. I smiled to myself. They named it Hearts of Grace, I whispered, but tonight only one was still beating. The morning after the Hearts of Grace disaster, society woke up hungover on someone else's shame. The gossip pages were merciless. When Grace trips on its own heels. Mrs. Preston's night of charity ends in public correction. Ella Preston, the daughter who knew how to rise. It's funny, I used to dread seeing my name in print. Now it felt like a name I'd finally earned, not borrowed. Lydia and Charlotte disappeared faster than a scandal can curtsy. Someone said they'd gone to the coast, someone else said Switzerland. Personally, I imagined them hiding in a boutique somewhere, buying forgiveness in beige. Arthur came home from the hospital a week later, walking slower but breathing deeper. He looked at me the way the sun looks at a window that's finally open. Ella, he said softly, I read about the event. I tried to smile. Then you know Lydia's charity work was educational. He chuckled, coughed once and sat down beside me. There are things I should have seen, he said, things I ignored because love makes fools of us all. Don't, I said quickly, you're the only one who saw anything worth saving. He took my hand, his fingers thinner than I remembered. Do you know what I'm proudest of? I shook my head. That you stayed kind in a house that tried to train it out of you. It wasn't a compliment, it was a benediction. 2 days later, the lawyer came. Papers, signatures, seals, the quiet sound of consequence. Arthur transferred everything to me, the estate, the company shares, the rights to the Preston name. Lydia and Charlotte were officially erased from the will. He asked if I wanted to be there when he told them. I said no, revenge wasn't the point anymore, peace was. But he insisted, some truths need witnesses. They arrived looking like grief in couture. Lydia's pearls trembled. Charlotte's eyes were ringed with sleeplessness and concealer. Arthur's voice was calm, almost gentle. I can't protect cruelty anymore, he said, and I won't reward it. Lydia tried to smile, the kind of smile that used to win her battles. Arthur's, you're unwell, you don't know what you're. He raised a hand. I'm not unwell, Lydia, I'm awake. Charlotte turned to me, her voice brittle. Are you happy now? I looked at her, really looked, at the fear behind the mascara, the emptiness behind the posture. No, I said quietly, just free. Later that evening, Daniel came by. He didn't knock right away, just stood at the door, watching the light fade over the garden. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. Your father's a brave man. He's tired of pretending, I said, it's contagious. He smiled, good, I like this version of you. I raised an eyebrow, which version? The one who doesn't apologize for surviving. We didn't need more words than that. Some silences are conversations that only love can hear. That night I walked through the Preston house, the halls echoing with ghosts that had finally been evicted. The lavender scent was still there, faint but fading. For years, this house had been a museum of manners and malice. Now it was just quiet. A beautiful kind of quiet, the kind that belongs to peace, not fear. I stopped by the grand staircase, where Lydia once lectured me on posture and gratitude. The marble was still cold, the light still perfect. Only difference was, it didn't look at me like a trespasser anymore. To the audience softly. Do you know what freedom smells like? It's not roses, it's dust finally settling where it belongs. When I reached my old room, I found the invitation from the Hearts of Grace gala tucked in a drawer. I almost threw it away, but then I smiled and kept it. A reminder that some people only learn grace when they lose everything that faked it. Father called from downstairs. Daniel was helping him with tea. For the first time, laughter, real unchoreographed laughter, filled the house. And just like that, the house that once rejected me finally became home. There's something strange about silence after scandal. It doesn't come gently. It hums in the air, heavy with unsent apologies and unswallowed pride. For weeks, my name lived in the mouths of people who once couldn't remember it. Ella Preston, the charity case turned heiress. The girl they thought was background decor now had her portrait hanging in the papers, calm, composed, and inconveniently victorious. Poetic, one columnist wrote, "A quiet storm in silk." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. Charlotte's downfall didn't happen overnight. That would have been merciful, and mercy had never been our family's strong suit. It began with invitations that stopped arriving. Then came the whispers that followed her through polished hotel lobbies and charity luncheons. Even her old friends, those perfume-scented vultures in designer smiles, had moved on to newer scandals. When I saw her next, it was at a gallery opening. She wore white, too symbolic, too desperate. We locked eyes for a moment, hers flickered, unsure whether to hate or to beg. I only nodded politely, like greeting a stranger you once knew too well. As I walked away, I heard her companion ask, "Was that her, the countryside wife?" And Charlotte replied, in a voice too brittle to be beautiful, "No, that was a lesson." Lydia Preston's tragedy wasn't public. It was private, the kind that happens when an audience stops clapping. Her charity circle replaced her with someone younger and louder. Her carefully constructed empire of gossip crumbled without the currency of relevance. And for the first time in her life, she had to sit in silence with her own reflection. Father visited her once. He returned with that look people have after attending a funeral they weren't sure was theirs to mourn. "She asked about you," he said quietly. I didn't ask what she said. Some conversations lose value once you learn peace. When I took over the Preston group, the boardroom felt colder than I remembered, as if the walls still held Lydia's perfume and Charlotte's laughter. We stripped the place bare. Gone were the portraits of Arthur and Lydia in their golden years. In their place, I hung something simple, a framed quote from Father's journal. "Kindness is not weakness, it's the last luxury the cruel can't afford." Under my leadership, we rebuilt, ethically, efficiently, and with a little humor. Daniel helped, of course. He had the kind of mind that saw through numbers and into people. Our meetings often turned into debates that ended in laughter. He'd lean back, smirking, and say, "You're terrifying when you're right." And I'd reply, "Then you must be terrified often." Father grew stronger, not miraculously, steadily. Every morning he sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket and sunlight, watching the world move at its own pace. One afternoon, he called me over. "I used to think I was cursed to live between two storms," he said. "Now," I asked. He smiled. "Now I think I was blessed to watch one grow into grace." He gave me an envelope that day, the final transfer of all his holdings. Not because I asked. Because I'd never needed to. A year later, the Hearts of Grace Foundation opened its new headquarters, a glass and marble space overlooking the city, with light streaming through every window. People said it was the event of the season. I said it was closure dressed in couture. As I walked onto the stage that night, flashes went off like polite lightning. Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in pockets, eyes steady. Father was there too, cane in hand, proud and tearful. I looked at them both before turning to the sea of faces waiting for something profound. "I once lived in a house," I began, "where everything was perfect except the people." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. "But tonight we build something different, a place where dignity doesn't depend on bloodlines or last names." Applause, genuine this time. For once I didn't feel like a performer, I felt like the director. Later that night, when the music faded and the last guest left, Daniel found me standing by the balcony, staring at the city lights. "You did it," he said softly. I smiled. "No, we did." He stepped closer, the scent of rain and cologne settling between us. "You know," he said, "for someone who grew up surrounded by cruelty, you turned out annoyingly gentle." "Occupational hazard," I murmured. "Kindness is my rebellion." He laughed, low, warm, real. And for the first time, I allowed myself to rest. Because revenge had never been my ending. Grace was. Epilogue. Weeks later, I visited the old Preston house. It was up for sale, stripped, empty, echoing. The lavender scent was gone, the walls unpolished, the mirrors harmless. I stood in the middle of the hall and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me everything I never want to be." And then I left, heels clicking, not as alarms but as music. They said time dulls everything. But some stories don't fade, they settle, like gold dust at the bottom of memory. Charlotte moved abroad, chasing new beginnings she couldn't quite name. Sometimes the tabloids caught her smiling beside people who didn't know who she used to be, and that perhaps was her peace. Lydia sold the Preston house and bought a cottage by the sea. Neighbours said she was kind, quiet, and always smelled faintly of lavender, as if she were trying to apologise to the air. Arthur lived long enough to see his daughter's name carved into the marble of her foundation. He said it was the only monument he ever needed. And Ella. She learned that victory isn't noise, it's calm. It's building a world where no one else has to survive what you did. And smiling while you do it. So if you ever find yourself in a world that tells you you're less, remember her story. And let grace be your revenge. If you've walked through Ella's world and felt her fire, tell me this. Speech balloon, have you ever been underestimated and risen anyway? Type Grace wins in the comments if you have. And don't forget, subscribe to Everyday Dramas, where revenge meets poetry. And kindness walks away with the crown.